Today is August 2nd, 2023. We are interviewing Milan Lou Votycki. My name is Esther Finder. Mr. Votycki is in Ontario, Canada. I am in Henderson, Nevada in the United States, and the language will be English.
Then I am cutting.
Thank you for speaking with us today. What is your name, sir, and can you please spell it?
Milan Joseph Votycki.
Could you spell it?
Milan Joseph Votycky.
And you have a nickname or another name you're known by?
Yes, Lou, L-O-U.
And can you tell us about that?
When I came to Canada as a refugee in 1948, my friends started to call me Luigi the Little Immigrant. And then they cut it down to Lou and it stuck.
What was your name at birth?
Milan Joseph Votycki.
Where were you born?
Prague, Czechoslovakia.
And when were you born?
March 23rd, 1934. And 6 hours later, my cousin Harry Knepfelmacher was born in the same hospital, and regrettably he was murdered in Auschwitz.
What was your father's name?
Arnold Votycki.
What did he do for a living?
He was a jeweler.
And your mother's name?
Anna Marie Kantorek Votycki.
And what work did she do?
She was a housewife.
Had your family lived in Czechoslovakia for many generations?
Since way beyond my knowledge. As far as I know, they lived in Czechoslovakia, which was part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire.
Did you have a large or a small family?
Fairly small.
Who was in your immediate family?
Well, I had two sets of grandparents. My dad's parents were Hugo and Olga Votycki, and my mother's parents were Max and Hedvika Kantorek. We had my mother's brothers were Vilda and Ernie Kantorek. Ernie was married, and he also had a daughter. He also had a sister, who was Elizabeth Kantorek.
Did you have any siblings?
Yes, my sister Vera was born 3 years after me.
What religious traditions did your family observe?
Not a heck of a lot. My grandmother was very religious, but she was about the only one.
Did you observe any Jewish holidays?
Well, at that time, I was pretty young and I don't remember any.
What are some of your earliest childhood memories?
I guess the most amazing one When I was 3 years old, my parents went on a second honeymoon to Yugoslavia. And my aunt Elizabeth, was looking after me. And we were at a lake, small lake, and we were on the beach, and I had just gotten a fire truck, and I ran along the beach pushing the fire truck, and I fell, and regrettably I used to leave my tongue sticking out, and I bit through my tongue. My Aunt Lisa picked me up, and I remember this like it happened yesterday. She was wearing a black bathing suit. She ran out on the road and stopped the car and took me to the hospital. That's the earliest memories that I have.
I realize you were very young, but to your knowledge, was your family aware of what was going on to the Jews
Not at
under
that
the
time.
Germans?
That was when we really didn't. It didn't hit us until Munich sold out Czechoslovakia to Hitler. My father was drafted into the Czech army, and he served on the German border for a number of months.
Had refugees from the Reich come to Prague at all?
Yes, they did. There were people who had either been released or escaped from German concentration camps, escaped to Czechoslovakia because it was the nearest neighbor.
And what kinds of things did they talk about?
I have no idea, but I know that the ones who had had their teeth injured were taken care of by my uncle, who was a dentist, and his name was Armin Knepfelmacher, and he would fix their teeth free of charge.
Did he say anything about the way those Jews were treated?
From what my mother says, yes, he told the family what had gone on.
Again, I know you were young, but what do you know or remember about Kristallnacht?
I don't know about Kristallnacht, but I vividly remember the German army marching into Prague on March 15th, 1939.
Can you share that day with us?
Well, the only thing that I remember was lots of German troops and trucks marching down our street. At that point, my parents moved in with my mother's parents right on the edge of Staroměstské náměstí, which is the old town square, 18 Celetná.
Was there any violence that day?
Not to my knowledge.
What anti-Semitic incidents did you witness or experience in Prague?
Well, my father was smuggling money to Switzerland to help us escape. And the Germans decided, because he was sending a lot of letters to Zurich, that he must be a spy. They came to our home at 18 Salatna and looking for my dad. My dad was hiding in the bedroom, and they never went any further than the sitting room. They questioned my mother and my grandparents, but they didn't get an answer. So the Gestapo man decided he was going to arrest my grandfather. My mother picked up a chair when he started to hustle my grandfather out of the room and threw it at the Gestapo man. The other one turned to my grandfather and said, "You tell her she tries that again, I'm going to shoot her." They arrested my grandfather, and as soon as they left, we got out of the home. We didn't come back till 6 p.m. when it was already dark. And when we walked into the living room, there was a glow of light from a cigarette, and my grandfather was sitting there. They held him all day, questioned him, and then they let him go.
What happened next?
Well, that was the red flag which triggered my parents' desire to get out of the country. So the first thing we had to do was get permission to leave Czechoslovakia. They permitted my mother, myself, and my sister to leave, but they wouldn't let my dad out of the country. My mother took us to San Remo, Italy, beach resort. And we met a cousin of my dad's and her husband, Hugo and Nellie Schwartz, in San Remo. Finally, my dad let my mother know that there was no way he was going to get out of Czechoslovakia. My mother said, "I'm coming back to get you." She decided to bring my sister and me back with her. Hugo and Nellie Schwartz said, "We'll take care of the kids, don't take them with you." My mother said, "If I die, they die with me." So she took us back to Czechoslovakia. She got permission from the Nazis for an exit for 14 people. My mother had gone to high school, German high school and high school, and she knew a lot about the German mentality. And the Nazi said Arisch, which meant non-Jewish. She snapped her heels and said, "Jawohl." He stamped 14 exit permits and gave them to her. My mother's courage and intelligence saved our lives that day.
Can you tell us why your father was denied permission to leave?
No, I have no idea. Probably because they suspected he was a spy.
And can you please elaborate on the last statement you just made about her courage and her resourcefulness
She
and
she
how it
was
helped you.
she was very intelligent and very brave. I mean, just to walk into Gestapo headquarters took courage. And she did what she had seen in the German school, where German kids snapped their heels and yelled "Jawohl." And so we left Prague, unfortunately, without my uncle, aunt, and my cousin Harry, because Armin decided that there was no real danger. We left from Wilson Station in Prague, and Armin came and saw us off. And the last thing he said to my parents is, "I'll be here to greet you when you come back from your vacation."
You told us who did not go with you. Who went with you?
Well, there was my mom and dad, my sister and I, my mother's brother and his wife and daughter Eva, um, Rudy Winter and his wife and daughter. They were my parents' best friends, and they replaced Armin and Greta and Harry. My dad had already paid for the expenses, so he just substituted them in place of our family. We went to Trieste. He went to Zurich, picked up his money, and we boarded a Russian ship, an Italian ship, the Conte Rosso, which was a cruise liner.
I have a few questions before we leave Prague completely. What did you bring with you? And I also wanted to ask you, I'm sorry, I should have asked this second one first. You gave me the names of 10 people. Did anybody else come with you? I thought there were 14 passes.
No, there were 4 more came later. And that was my mother's parents and her brother Vilda and her sister Lisa.
Okay, thank you. And what were you allowed to take with you?
Very little, very little. Basically, clothes and, as far as I know, clothes was the only thing we brought with us. And 6 weeks later, we boarded the Conte Rosso, which was later sunk by a British submarine.
Where did your family want to go? What was their number one choice of destination?
Shanghai. China was the only country that would give us permission to go to Shanghai. And all they asked for was $400 US to guarantee we had money when we got there. And when we got to Shanghai, my dad got his $400 back.
One more question about Prague before we leave completely. Is there anything else that comes to mind about your time in Prague that we should mention before we move to Shanghai?
Well, the only other thing is Harry and I were very close. We were brought up like twins. Everywhere he went, I went. And, as I said, we were 6 hours apart when we were born, and we really were like twins.
Were there any organizations or individuals to help you, your family, get papers or transportation, or did your family do it all on their own?
No. My mother did most of the paperwork. My father kept sending every penny he had to Zurich.
Okay, so you boarded a ship. Who else was on that ship with you?
I have no idea. I was only familiar with the 10 people that in our group. There was one incident on the ship that's noteworthy. The ship didn't have a swimming pool, but they built a 6-foot wooden pool on deck, and they put canvas into it to hold water. They pumped water in from the ocean, so that was our swimming pool, which was 6 feet deep. It was extremely hot. We were traveling in May, June, and it was getting hot near the tropics, of course. And I woke up early one morning and I was covered in sweat. Being a dumb 6-year-old, I put on a life jacket and went to the pool. I jumped into the pool and promptly fell out of the life jacket. It was an adult life jacket. I opened my eyes when I hit bottom, and the hose from the ocean was hanging right down to the ground. I grabbed the hose and shimmied up the hose, and boy, I got out of that pool fast. I didn't dare tell my mother because she would have killed me. And so I snuck back into the cabin and covered myself with a blanket, and that was it. But that was my first close call in life. When we arrived in Shanghai, we arrived at about 10 o'clock at night, and the dock was covered with hundreds, maybe a couple of thousand Chinese. My mother started to scream, "Anybody here speak Czech?" Believe it or not, in that crowd there was one guy who did. His name was Mr. Reitler. He said, "I speak Czech." And he took us in hand and took us to the Czech consul's home. And we spent the night sleeping in the hallways of the Czech consul's home. Then my parents found a place, sort of a townhouse. So all of us moved into that townhouse. It was a little crowded. Next door to us was a German consular official. He had a son, 12 years old, who was a Nazi youth and ran around in his Nazi youth uniform, including a dagger. I made a terrible mistake one day. I called him a dirty Nazi. He pulled the knife and took it to me and put 3 stab wounds into my left arm. I came home. My mother covered me in towels, Then she went chasing after this brat, and when she caught him, she beat him within an inch of his life. And I have no permanent injuries. I have one little scar on my wrist. I guess that's where it was the deepest. And I learned to keep my mouth shut.
What part of town did you settle in?
Well, we were in the French sector. Shanghai was divided into French, international, and the Japanese sector, which was basically a poor suburb called Hongqiu. Today they call it Hongqua. After Pearl Harbor,
Oh, you're running ahead of me, sir. I wanted to ask you first about what adjustments were difficult for you and your family when you got to Shanghai.
for me, nothing. I learned to speak German, English, and Mandarin.
What about for your parents? What adjustments were
Well,
difficult for them?
my dad had to make a living, so that was tough. But you know, he was a good businessman, and we managed to survive.
What did he do?
Well, he was a jeweler, so he dealt.
Also in China?
Yeah, and the Chinese love jewelry, so it worked.
What were your days like when you first got there? Were you able to attend school?
I went to the American school first, and basically that's where I learned my English. People still accuse me of having an American accent. And, you know, it was just a very normal thing. And other than my one incident with the Nazi punk, I'd never had a problem with anybody.
Did you experience or witness any anti-Semitism in Shanghai?
I wouldn't have known it if I'd seen it. I was too young. The Chinese treated us well.
How much did you and your family know about what was happening in Europe while you were in China?
Nothing. Nothing at all.
Is there anything else that stands out in your mind in this time period before Pearl Harbor? And then we can talk about Pearl Harbor in just a minute. Is there anything that stands out in your memory about that time?
In the summertime, Shanghai would flood. There'd be monsoons and the city would flood. And one funny incident, my mother and my aunt were shopping downtown in a department store, and all of a sudden their feet got wet and the water was rising in the department store. So they went outside and they took 2 rickshaws, one for each, to take them home. And when they got home, my mother paid her driver, and my aunt started to argue about the price. So he just dropped the rickshaw and dumped her into the water. That was pretty funny.
Now let's start talking about Pearl Harbor. Can you tell us about that?
Well, when Pearl Harbor came, there was a little bit of fighting with the British and the U.S. Marines but it didn't last long. The Japanese had far more troops there than anybody else. And they'd been fighting a war with China for 5 years by then. The main result was that a few months later, in May of '42, the Japanese ordered the Americans and British and Dutch to concentration camps, basically prisoner of war camps. They also ordered all stateless refugees, which is what we were called, into the ghetto in Hongqiu. As the British and Americans and Dutch went to prison camps, we had to move to the ghetto. We were not allowed to leave the ghetto without permits, 3-month permits. And you had to have a good reason to leave the ghetto. Well, I had a good reason. I attended a Catholic missionary school, St. Francis Xavier's College. So the Japanese gave me 3-month renewable permits to leave the ghetto. Every morning, 16 of us who went to St. Francis Xavier's would get together at the boundary, and then we would together walk about 2, maybe 3 miles to the school. And at the end of school, we would all again get together and go in a group back to the ghetto. Really, we just went to school, and the brothers tried to convert us all to Catholicism, but as far as I know, they didn't do very well. At the end of 1944, they cut off my permit to go to school. So I then started to go to the Jewish school, which was mostly staffed by volunteers. The Jewish school was right on the edge of the ghetto, and for 5 months I attended that school. My mother also insisted that I learn Russian. She found a lady named Madame Sigeti to teach me. Madame Sigeti was quite a lady, and basically she taught me Russian, telling me stories about the Russian royal family. She claimed that she was an employee of the royal family. We didn't believe her. We all believed that she was Anastasia, the missing daughter of the Tsar. And the reason we believed that was she knew too much. The oldest son of the Tsar was a hemophiliac. And he brought the Tsar brought in a Hungarian prisoner of war who was a dentist. And he was there to treat the Tsar's son. Now, Madame Szigeti claimed that she fell in love with him and married him. Well, royals don't just marry ordinary people. They need permission or a revolution. And the Tsar's entire family was massacred except for Anastasia. So I honestly believe that I was taught Russian by a Russian princess.
I have one or two questions for you, sir. I guess I need clarification. You said you were stateless. Was that a legal status?
That's what the Japanese called us. We basically, Bohemia was a protectorate of Nazi Germany. And we had Nazi documentation, but we refused to use it.
And can you also speak to us, please, about the conditions in the ghetto? Was it enclosed? What kind of housing was there? Food, medication, whatever you can remember about the conditions in the ghetto.
It was a slum suburb of Shanghai. We were fortunate. My father was a successful businessman, and when we were ordered into the ghetto, he built 2 small bungalows attached to each other. And our entire family lived in there. And, you know, before we moved to the ghetto, my mother's parents and brother and sister arrived via the Trans-Siberian Railway through Japan and joined us. That was the other 4 people. And shortly thereafter, we had to move to the ghetto. Our accommodation was not great. I mean, the 2 little bungalows were tiny, and the cooking was done on a little hibachi stove. And but honestly, we lived like kings compared to most of the residents of the ghetto. They lived in barracks, they lived jammed into apartments. The accommodation was not great.
What about food and sanitation and medicine?
Food, basically, you know, the food that was available for the Chinese was available for us. Sanitation was non-existent.
Japan was allied with Germany. What do you know about Germany's attempts to make Japan move against its Jews?
One of Hitler's thugs, Meitzinger, came to Shanghai to convince the Japanese to kill us. The Japanese did not do that. And probably the chief rabbi in Shanghai saved our lives. He and a number of other Jewish leaders were called to a meeting with the Japanese commander. And the Japanese commander asked them, "Why do the Germans hate you so much?" And the chief rabbi's answer was quick. He said, "Because they think that we're Orientals." And that probably saved our lives.
You want to expand on that at all?
What's that?
Would you like to expand on that at all?
Well, we were never harmed. The Jews in Shanghai were basically protected. And this guy Meinzinger, he was an animal, and he kept trying to convince the Japanese to kill us. But they, you know what? They had caused a slaughter in Nanking during the Japanese-Chinese War, and I think they'd seen enough blood.
What were relationships like between the Chinese people and the Jews?
You know, I can honestly say we never had a problem. You know, we just dealt with each other like human beings. we all of us who survived there, I'm sure you wouldn't find anybody who had a real problem with the Chinese.
After Pearl Harbor, did things change, slowly over time? And if so, can you walk us through the changes?
Quite honestly, I would say no, there were no changes until the end of '44, when the Japanese were losing the war in the Pacific and they stopped us from leaving the ghetto.
What would you want people to understand about life in the Shanghai ghetto for someone who knows nothing?
It was very, very hard for the poor people. My Aunt Lisa ran a food kitchen for them, but it's amazing how many poor Jews got out of Europe and made it to China.
How closely were you able to follow the progress of the war?
Well, we were lucky. My uncle Vilda was a nerd, and he actually built a small shortwave radio. So, to my knowledge, we were the only ones who were able to get the voice of America, which almost got us into trouble. On July 17th, 1945, the U.S. Army Air Corps conducted its biggest raid on Shanghai of the war. Boy, they came close. One of the bombs hit about 300 meters from our home. They bombed us severely, and 33 Jews died in the air raid. But you know, you hear all these stories about collateral damage. Nobody cared. We were all happy that the Americans are coming. We knew that once they started to bomb us, they were going to be here soon. And that's all we focused on. And, you know, I mean, by then I was 11 years old, and you could feel it. We're winning. The Japanese are losing. Anyway, when the atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima, my dad, my uncles, and my grandfather knew about it basically that day. and the radio reception wasn't great. So the atomic bomb was referred to as the atom bomb. Atom, which it wasn't. It was the atomic bomb. And they made one mistake. They talked about it in front of me. And Big Mouth Milan told all his friends. The Japanese found out about it, and they came looking for a radio. Fortunately, they didn't find the shortwave radio. But they find us because we had a radio. But I almost got the family into bad trouble. Then the second atomic bomb was dropped, and that was the end of it. The Japanese fled. They abandoned us. So we knew the war was over. And the first Americans arrived on Saturday, September the 3rd. And the first Americans I saw was a squadron of Flying Tigers. 12 fighters with a big jaw on the nose. My mother said, "Come and finish your breakfast." And I said, "No. I want to watch them. There's going to be more coming." And she said, "Why?" I said, "Because that's what I'm going to do when I grow up." At age 22, 11 years later, I was flying fighters in North American Air Defense Command.
We'll get to that in a minute. Can you give us a time frame for that Allied bombing in the ghetto?
Well, that was July 17th. And from then on, they bombed us every day.
Were there bomb shelters available?
No. In fact, my father very foolishly started to build one after July 17th. And it was built pretty fast. The only trouble was Shanghai is on a delta. 3 feet down is water. Well, this bomb shelter was full of water, so we couldn't use it anyway.
Can you tell us about liberation? What did that mean to you? The war is over.
Well,
now what?
First of all, we wanted to find out what happened at home.
And how did you do that?
Well, again, you acquire radios to listen to shortwave, and I mean that was my Uncle Vilda's job, not mine. But we knew, basically all we knew was about concentration camps. We didn't know about the death camps. And we didn't really find out about that till we got back to Czechoslovakia.
How long did you stay in Shanghai?
Exactly 1 year. On July 16th, 1946, Dad came home and said, "We're going home." And Mom said, "When?" He said, "Tomorrow." We packed everything up, and then Dad said, no, we don't need all these clothes and stuff. And he went out, and with every penny he had, he bought American cigarettes. We had 2 suitcases full of cigarettes. And that was our currency going home. For
Just before you leave China, is there anything else that sticks out in your mind that you want to share with us?
no, we couldn't wait. We got on that ship the next day, and at 5 p.m. we sailed. And we had one very exciting part to the trip home. 3 religious Jews who had been attending a very famous Jewish school in Shanghai decided they were going to go to Palestine, and they came on board the ship and stayed. At about 9 o'clock at night, now this is a troop ship, the men were in the front hold, the women were in the center hold, and the young couples were in the rear hold. My uncle came back to the hold where we were all in and told us about the 3 Jews that he had found. And so the Czech men, there were about 12 Czech men, 13 Czech men, decided we have to feed them until they can get off the ship in the Suez Canal. So feeding them was going to be easy because all the food was served in a big mess, and everybody went by in a tray and they just filled up the tray. Well, the next morning, the first 3 Czechs who had the trays for the young Jewish men took the food to them. Bingo! They wouldn't eat it. It wasn't kosher. I mean, people were willing to die because they wouldn't eat food that wasn't kosher. From then on, we fed them fresh fruit. The Americans had lots of fresh fruit. So for the next 3 weeks, they ate nothing but apples and oranges. One thing, it was good for their systems. And now we arrived in Suez. Now they want to get off and walk across the Sinai to Palestine. My dad was in charge of that. During my year in Shanghai with the Americans, I became friends with hundreds of sailors. I showed them around town and, where they could go and where they shouldn't go. And I made friends with sailors on the ship, of course. And my closest friend was the 3rd engineer. And luckily, he was the officer of the deck the day that these 3 young men wanted to get ashore. So my dad said, take him over to the port side of the ship because we're going to drop these guys off the starboard side of the ship. So I did. I kept him on the left side of the ship, and the Czech men dropped a rope down, and they hired a guy with a rowboat, and the first two got down all right. The third guy lost his grip and fell into the Suez Canal. Well, the fishermen fished him out, but you know what? My dad had paid him to get them off. He took them straight to the British police station. The British still controlled the Suez Canal. The British took them to Cyprus, to a concentration camp, and probably saved their lives, because if they had tried to cross the Sinai, they would have died.
Can you please continue your journey now through the Suez?
We went on to Toulon, France. And we got into a DP camp. The French government put us in a DP camp. And my father said, "I'm not staying here, I'm leaving." So promptly all the Czechs followed him. All 28 of us took a train to Marseille. We were in Marseille for a week, and the whole stay in Marseille cost my father 1 carton of American cigarettes. That was the currency. One day we're sitting in a restaurant in Marseille, and there are a bunch of young people sitting over at another table, about 10 or 12 of them. They were Jewish kids who had survived concentration camps. My mother, like an arrow, went over, talked to them. She came back and she said, "Arnold, we're staying in France." He said, "Why?" She says, "These kids are busting the blockade to go to Israel, to Palestine. And they tell me, don't go back to Czechoslovakia, because the communists are going to take over." The kids were right. My father said, "I had to learn English in Shanghai, I'm not going to learn French." We went to Paris, and that was a great trip. The train was jammed. My dad bought first class cabin. In fact, 2, he bought 2. And the only way we could get onto that train was through an open window into these 2 cabins. All 28 Czechs were in those 2 6-passenger cabins with all the luggage. I couldn't stand it. I went out in the hallway. The hallway was jammed, wall to wall. You know what? It's about a 6-hour trip to Paris. I slept standing up. I couldn't fall because there were so many people there. Then we spent a week in Paris, again another carton of cigarettes. And the Czech government sent a train to pick us up. And the best part of the trip was going through Germany and seeing the destruction. That was very enjoyable. I know it was for me. And we got back to Czechoslovakia, and Within 18 months, the prediction of those young kids came true. The communists took over, and then we had to flee again to Canada.
You said previously that you didn't really know what was going on in Europe until you came back to Europe. What efforts did you make to find out the fates of family and friends, and what did you learn?
That was the first thing. And we found out that Armin, Greta, and Harry died on December 18th, 1943 in Auschwitz. My grandparents died in June of 43 in Treblinka. They were ordered to dig their own graves, ordered to strip their clothes, which went to Germany, and shot in the back of the head while they were kneeling. My father turned to my mother and said, "Don't ever mention God to me again. Where was he when my parents were slaughtered?" He said, "I never saw my mother in her underwear, and those bastards saw her naked."
How many were still alive of the people you knew?
Well, really, there were only 3 people, all cousins, who met us at the railway station in Prague. One of them, Helen Gross, survived a death march from her concentration camp. On the death march, they were eating cow dung to survive.
When you got back to Prague, how were you treated by the civilians?
There wasn't a problem. In fact, in school, the kids called me China. They nicknamed me China. And I was getting on the streetcar to go home, and one of my classmates yelled, see you tomorrow, China." And there was a man standing behind him. He said, "What do you mean, China?" He said, "Well, he just came back from China." So he said, "Do you know if he's a Boy Scout?" He said, "Yeah, he is." Well, this guy was the whatever big cheese in the Scout magazine in Prague. And he interviewed me, and he wrote a big article about our family in China.
Did you witness or experience any anti-Semitism in Prague?
No. It was, you were either for the communists or against them. That was the division line.
Other than the interview that you just mentioned, did people ask you about your time in China?
Yes, but, you know, in casual talks. And the only real case that I am aware of anti-Semitism happened when after we escaped from Czechoslovakia the second time.
Okay, before we get there, How long did you stay in Czechoslovakia? What's the time frame?
About 20 months.
And why did you leave?
Because we didn't want to live under, we escaped one dictator, we weren't going to live under another one.
And where did you choose to go and why?
Well, we went to Canada because it was the only country that would accept us.
Okay, now you want to share the story about anti-Semitism?
Well, my father's best friend in high school was Jan Pachel, who was not Jewish. And he was very wealthy, and he had a large farm. And he had another friend who happened to be Jewish, whom he hid during the entire war on his farm. And when the communists took over, this man became the deputy minister of finance. He was a communist too. Pachel went to see his friend and said, "Give me an exit permit." So this guy did. And he said, "By the way, my friend Arnold Wojtycki is coming to see you, and you do the same for him." So Dad went, and we got our exit permit. 4 years later, Stalin had a pogrom against the Jews and government. He executed every Jew of senior rank in Russia. The Czechs were monkey see, monkey do, and they decided to do the same thing. So all the Jews in the Czech government were slaughtered. They were hung. And our benefactor was one of them.
One last question about Prague before we leave and move on. How did your family support itself? Was your dad able to pick up
Dad was
his
back in
business
the
again?
jewelry business. Those 2 suitcases full of cigarettes all turned to jewelry.
When did you leave Czechoslovakia? And how did you travel, and what could you bring with you?
We left in April of 48, and we went by train to London, England, and then we took a ship from Liverpool to New York. And we, you know, that was like going first class compared to what we'd been before.
And what could you take with you?
Everything we took was counted by a government official. And basically it was enough clothes for the summer. We only had a visitor visa to Canada.
Is there anything else that sticks out in your mind about your time in Czechoslovakia after the war?
Not really, other than the election the election right after the communists took over was a phony. And my friend Gustav Mracek and I, stupid 12-year-olds, went around harassing the communists. We're lucky we didn't get killed.
What were your expectations of Canada, and what were your first impressions?
My first impression, we arrived in Montreal on July the 1st, 1948. And the city was covered in Union Jacks. And I said to my dad, "What's the matter with these people? Don't they have a flag of their own?" That was my first reaction. And it took the French Canadians 19 years to discover that it's not really appropriate for a French city to be covered in Union Jacks.
How were you received by the Canadian people?
I didn't have a problem. I mean, we were among the first Czech refugees from the communists, and you know, we moved into the Côte-de-Neige district. The next thing you know, a lot of refugees followed us. Refugees feel comfortable when they're near people that are kin to them.
What did the Canadians ask you about Europe or China, anything like that?
Just general questions. There was no, you know, it was. I know I was accepted. I played soccer. I played hockey. I was one of the gang.
Which leads me right to my next question. What adjustments were easy for you or difficult for you and your family?
Well, difficulty was my dad making a living, because my dad didn't know what the word market research meant. And he opened a jewelry store around the corner from People's Credit Jewelers. Well, anybody wanted to buy jewelry went to People's Credit, where they paid $1 down and $1 a week. My dad wanted cash. He wasn't successful for the first time in his life. So
How did he manage?
My mother went to work. I went to work. I quit high school and I went to night school. And I spent 13 years in night school at Sir George Williams University.
Can you tell us how your family expanded in Canada?
Well, I was very lucky. I met a wonderful young woman. We had 2 beautiful daughters, 4 grandsons, and now 2 great-grandchildren.
Please tell us what you decided to do with your life. You gave us a preview.
Well, when I quit, in order to support the family, I quit work and I got a job with Canadian National Railways. And I went to night school because I needed an education to be a pilot. And that was my objective. And after 6 years of high school at night, I made it, and then I joined the Air Force. And it wasn't easy, but you know, when you're a dreamer, You just keep dreaming, and you know, it was 16, 17 tough months of training. But on October the 27th, 1957, I got my wings, and that same day my father had a massive coroner in Montreal. I was in Winnipeg. And then things really got tough for my mother, because Dad was in the hospital for 5 weeks. You know, today they kick you out after 2 days, but in those days it was a major problem.
What happened next?
Well, Dad recovered, went back to work, and continued to make a living, but not in the jewelry business. And at age 60, he passed away.
Can you tell us about your professional career?
Well, after I graduated from high school, and I met my beautiful wife, and then I kind of started to hesitate about going away to train, and she said, "You go and do what you gotta do." So I went to London, Ontario. I went through the officer selection unit. Then I went to outside of London, an old base, and there we went through pre-flight training. And the amazing thing was, in order to pass pre-flight school, I needed math, which I really didn't have much of. And so I discovered that by learning all the necessary formulas, you can pass, and I passed all the math tests. Then I went to flying school, and I learned about how cold it is in Winnipeg in the wintertime. And I learned to fly. And in flying school, I always did very well in the flying part. I wasn't so good in the ground school part, but the flying part pulled me through. And either you can fly or you can't. And all the math in the world isn't going to help you. And you know, it was great. I served 10 years in the Air Force. I flew fighters for 5 years out of that time. And then I joined Air Canada and became a pilot. And I got in 25 years with Air Canada, which was great, flying all over the world. And, you know, going to places I would never have seen if I hadn't done that. And then my wife said to me, "How are we going to live after you retire?" I said, "My pension." She said, I can't live on your pension. She said, you better find something else to do. So she pushed me into another interest, which was financial planning. And I started to take courses in financial planning. And here I am at 89. I'm still a financial advisor, enjoying every minute of it. But, you know, it's coming to an end. It's time to go before you get kicked out.
You told us that you married and had children. What did you tell your family about your World War II experiences?
Not until they were grown up. You know, they heard a lot of it from their grandmother. And I just filled in the slots. And, you know, my girls, well, one of them contacted you to interview me. And now they're going to have a living history.
Have you spoken publicly about your experiences?
Yes, I have. I've done schools, and I've done, I even did a school in Chicago. There's a school here in Toronto that actually did an interview along these lines, and it was done by the kids in grade 10, and they did a great job.
Are you connected in any way with other survivors from Shanghai?
No. I, quite honestly, the last one, I lived in Australia, and I met her when I was in Australia in 2012. We had a good reunion. She was a medical doctor, still practicing, and her family ended up in Australia.
Can you tell us about your book, please?
Well, my mother wrote a book 30 years ago, and the editor of the book contacted me and said, your mother says your life was a lot more interesting than hers. You should write a book. So I wrote a book, and she edited it, and she did a great job. I mean, she made the book mainly because the first draft, she said, there's not enough passion in it. You got to put passion in it. I said, I didn't think anybody wanted to hear my passion. She said, yes, they do. So I had to make a lot of adjustments and put passion in it. Here's the book.
We'll show your book later. We'll get to that in just a couple of moments. Have you been back to Prague?
Yes, and I've been back to Shanghai.
Go ahead.
I've been back to Shanghai with my brother. My brother was born in Canada after we came here.
You told me you have a favorite place to visit in Prague. Can you share that with us?
Reinhard Heydrich was one of the two masters of the Holocaust. Him and Heinrich Himmler. And in 1942, 5 Czech paratroopers, commandos from Britain, dropped into Czechoslovakia, and they assassinated him. The Germans, of course, knew nothing about it until they promised that if any one of them surrendered and turned in the others, they would not be harmed. One of the 5 became a traitor, and he wasn't the assassin, he was just helping. And the 2 commandos who killed Heydrich were Kubisch and Rapczyk, and they carried out the assassination on April the 6th, 1942, and happily, it took him a long time to die. He died on the 27th of May, 1942, in great pain, because the assassination was a little bit botched, and the bomb that they threw was supposed to land in his convertible, but it landed underneath. But the good news was that he died slowly, because all of the springs in the underneath him entered his body. He suffered for 5 weeks. Anyway, there's a museum at the church where the commandos were killed. The church was a Greek Orthodox church called St. Cyril and Methodius, and the 4 commandos were hiding there. The 5th one had already betrayed them. The bishop and all the staff at the church were murdered by the Nazis. The Czech commandos were being flooded out when they committed suicide. The Germans somehow decided that the town of Lidice was where they were connected to, which wasn't true. They burned the village, they killed all the men, the women all went to concentration camps, and the children were kidnapped and shipped to Germany to be adopted. When I go to Prague, I always go to the museum because it tells you the whole story of what these men went through in order to kill the butcher of Bohemia.
Have you been to Auschwitz?
Yes.
Would you care to share that experience with us?
Well, my wife is a Canadian born, and she was devastated. And what really got to her was the artificial limbs and the eyeglasses on display. And the shoes. And it's a horror show. We were very fortunate that the taxi driver I hired to take us out there took us out for lunch. We had a little bit of beer and lunch, and then he took us to a former salt mine on the other side of Krakow. We're grateful because the salt mine closed down and the miners needed a job, and they built a cathedral underground. 500 meters underground, there's a Catholic cathedral built by the miners of that city. And that calm down.
Are you okay?
Yeah.
I'm going to ask you about a couple historical events, and I'd like your reaction to them. Do you remember the Nuremberg trials at all?
Yes.
Could you speak to that?
Every one of them should have been executed. They were all guilty. None of them were innocent. It's the same with Putin's gang in Russia right now.
What were your thoughts when the State of Israel was born?
Great. I wasn't old enough to go and fight, but if I had been, I would have.
How closely did you follow the Eichmann trial, and do you think justice was done?
Yeah, except they should have pulled his fingernails first.
What comes to your mind when you see the images of refugees coming from Ukraine?
Bad memories. And it's not just the refugees in Ukraine, it's the ones in Syria. You know, it's awful. I watched the boats, and, you know, just about 2 weeks ago, I had to remind a relative who was saying that Canada shouldn't accept so many refugees. I said, you forget you were a refugee when you were 10 years old. People have short memories.
Is there anything we haven't spoken about that you'd like to add before I ask my last question?
No, I think we've pretty well covered it all.
What message do you have for future viewers of this interview?
Never forget. And never again. You know, the motto of the State of Israel, never again. And, you know, I flew fighters during the Cold War. Canada had 21 fighter squadrons. Today we have 3. We had 21 fighter squadrons that were manned by high school graduates. Today, if you want to be a pilot in the Royal Canadian Air Force, you have to have a university degree. It's nonsense. Either you can fly or you can't. And some of the best pilots I flew with in Air Canada, like Gordie Jones, who had a high school education, and he flew survivors of the Bergen-Belsen camp to Britain to the hospitals. one of the finest pilots. And he had a great school education. It's all, you know, society has become enamored with university degrees. You don't need them. As I said, you either can fly an airplane or you can't. You can't, you die. I think one of the big problems that we have today, and this was told to me by the #3 general in the U.S. Army. You know, Lou, it's sad. Only 2% of Americans are willing or able to defend their country. So you better stop weeding out the university graduates and let the high school graduates do the fighting.
Thank you for speaking with us today.
You're welcome.
Do you want me to cut here?
Yes.
Okay, cutting. On.
Hugo and Olga Wojtycki, my grandparents,
And when was this taken? And where?
1939.
Where was it taken?
In Prague.
Thank you.
And cutting. Rolling.
Can you tell us about this photo, please?
Greta, Harry, and Armin Knepfelmacher, my uncle, aunt, and cousin. And this picture is 3 passport photos put together. That's the only picture we have of them. Prague, Czechoslovakia.
Yes.
Sorry, I noticed your audio is not connected for channel 2. Do you need your voice for sure for this?
You're talking to me?
Yes. I'm connecting right now.
It would be helpful so
Yeah,
people
you're
know
connected
who's
now.
responding.
Apologies on that for there we go. You're connected.
You want to do it again?
If you mind. Thank
No. Okay.
Wait.
you. And 3, 2, 1.
Okay, we had a technical problem. Could you please start again and tell us about this photo?
Greta, Harry, and Armin Knepfelmacher, my aunt, cousin, and uncle. Photographs are passport photos from 1939 joined together. It's the only picture we have of them.
And where were the pictures taken?
In Prague, Czechoslovakia.
And what happened to these people?
They died in Auschwitz on December 18th, 1943, in the gas chamber.
Thank you.
And cutting.
Milan.
Can you tell us about this picture, please?
Milan Joseph Wojtycki receiving his navigator wings in Winnipeg on October the 27th, 1957.
And what country, please?
Canada.
Thank you.
Cutting.
And who
Milan,
is this?
Milan Joseph Wojtycki, brand new first lieutenant with wings, October 27th, 1957.
And where was it taken?
Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada.
Thank you.
Cutting.
Milan
And this-
Joseph
Go
Wojtycki.
ahead.
Oh. Milan
Go ahead, sir.
Milan Joseph Wojtycki and O'Neill Lacharite, Top Gun crew on 432 Squadron at the rocket meet in May of 1960 in Cold Lake, Alberta, Canada.
Thank you.
Cutting. Fine.
What are we looking at here?
Book written by my mother, Anna Marie, also known as Anka Wojtycki, knocking on every door in her 90s.
And when was it written?
In the 1990s. It was a 3-year effort.
And what about this photo? Where was that taken and when?
That's an old picture before the war
And where was it taken?
in Czechoslovakia somewhere.
Thank you.
Cut it.
What is this?
This is my mother's book translated into Czech. The name is Saved in the Shanghai Ghetto, and it was published 1998.
I might have to do that again. There was a ring in the background, just for audio. Thank you. Do you mind doing that for me?
I can start?
Yes.
My mother's book, translated into Czech, 1998. The title is translated Saved in the Shanghai Ghetto, and it was published in Prague, Czechoslovakia.
Could you say the title in the language?
Zachráněna v šanghajském ghettu.
Thank you.
Thank you. Cutting.
What are we looking at now?
Book written in 2019 by Milan Joseph Wojtycki, Dreamers Refuse to be Victims, in Toronto, Canada.
And what inspired you to write your book?
My mother's editor suggested that I write the book because my mother said that my life was more interesting than hers.
Thank you.
Cutting.
Royal
And what is
Canadian.
this?
Okay, this is a CF-100 all-weather fighter, part of North American Air Defense Command, and Canada had 21 fighter squadrons at that time, and we happened to win the Cold War with it. This aircraft is from my own fighter squadron, the 432, the Black Cougars. Bagotville, Quebec, Canada.
And sir, please give us your name as well.
Milan Joseph Wojtycki.
Thank you. And this now concludes our interview.